Before we dive into this chilling story, I want to take a quick moment to ask for your support. Crafting these in depth, real life stories takes a ton of research and dedication, and I'm constantly looking to grow and improve my content. If you're captivated by these stories and want more, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support is crucial to help me continue bringing these gripping tales to life. Together, we can grow this channel and dive deeper into the stories that need to be told. Let's build something incredible one click at a time. It was a warm and sunny morning in South Lake Tahoe, the kind of day where nothing seemed out of the ordinary. On June 10th, 1991, 11-year-old Jaycee Lee Dugard woke up just like any other day, got dressed in her favorite pink outfit, and set off for school. The walk to the bus stop was routine, something she did every day. But on this day, the ordinary would turn into a nightmare. As Jaycee walked up the hill, unaware of the danger lurking just moments away, a car approached. What seemed like a normal vehicle passing by would soon become the start of her terrifying ordeal. In an instant, her world was shattered. The car stopped, and before Jaycee could react, a man later identified as Philip Garrido deployed a stun gun, incapacitating her. Within moments, she was dragged into the car by his wife, Nancy Garrido, disappearing from sight. Her stepfather, Carl Probin, witnessed the horrifying abduction from their home. His frantic efforts to chase after the car were in vain as Jaycee, an innocent child, was stolen away, beginning a journey of captivity that would last for nearly 2 decades. Philip Garrido's life before the abduction of Jaycee Dugard was defined by escalating criminal behavior and deep psychological issues. Born in Pittsburgh, California in 1951, Garrido's life took a dark turn in his late teens after a motorcycle accident, which reportedly altered his personality. He began abusing drugs, particularly methamphetamine and LSD, which further fueled his disturbing tendencies. His criminal history started early with multiple arrests for sexual offenses. In 1976, he abducted a 25-year-old woman in South Lake Tahoe and brutally raped her over several hours in a storage facility. A police officer's routine check interrupted this, leading to his arrest and conviction. Garrido was sentenced to 50 years in federal prison, but shockingly, he served only 11 before being released on parole. While incarcerated, Garrido met Nancy Bocangra during one of her visits to the prison to see her uncle. Nancy, who had a relatively clean background, gradually became enmeshed in Philip's life, falling under his manipulative influence. By the time of his release, Nancy had fully embraced Garrido's warped worldview. Together, they would later conspire in the abduction of Jaycee Dugard. Philip's deep-seated sexual deviance and violent nature dominated their relationship, with Nancy acting as a willing accomplice to his predatory actions. These factors, Philip's prior criminal record, drug abuse, and manipulation of Nancy, set the stage for the horrific events that followed. On the fateful morning of June 10th, 1991, Jaycee Lee Dugard's walk to her school bus stop seemed like any other. Dressed in her favorite pink outfit, she was just 11 years old, full of innocence and unaware of the danger lurking nearby. As she walked uphill along the quiet road, Philip and Nancy Garrido were watching her from their gray sedan, prepared to execute a plan that would devastate her life for the next 18 years. As Jaycee neared the bus stop, Philip Garrido seized the moment. He drove up alongside her, rolled down his window, and without hesitation used a stun gun to shock her. The sudden jolt caused her to collapse, leaving her defenseless. As Jaycee lay incapacitated on the ground, Nancy Garrido quickly exited the car, dragging her into the back seat. With a blanket thrown over Jaycee's small body, the Garridos sped off, leaving nothing but silence behind them. Just a short distance away, Carl Probin, Jaycee's stepfather, stood helplessly watching the horrifying scene unfold. From his front yard, Carl saw the car approach, watched as his stepdaughter was stunned, and then witnessed the abduction. In sheer panic, he jumped onto his bicycle in a desperate attempt to follow the car, pedaling with everything he had. But the Garridos were too fast. Realizing he couldn't catch up, Carl rushed to a neighbor's house and immediately called the authorities, describing the car and the situation in frantic detail. Despite the swift action by Carl and the police, JC vanished into thin air. The call sparked a massive search effort, but as hours turned into days and days into weeks, the trail grew cold, leaving her family and the entire community in a state of agonizing uncertainty. The world moved on, but for JC, her nightmare had only just begun. As news of Jaycee Dugard's abduction spread, the community of South Lake Tahoe was thrust into a state of shock and action. The moment her stepfather, Carl Proben, called 911, the local police launched a large-scale search operation. Helicopters hovered over the area and ground teams combed through nearby forests, fields, and roads, hoping to find any trace of the missing 11-year-old. Hundreds of volunteers from the community joined in, armed with flyers and an unyielding determination to bring JC home. The media quickly picked up the story, amplifying the urgency. News outlets broadcast her smiling face across the nation, and her case became a fixture on television, newspapers, and radio. "Have you seen this girl?" became the question on everyone's lips. But despite the widespread attention and the tireless efforts of police and volunteers, the search yielded no significant clues. As days stretched into weeks, the family's hopes were tested. JC's mother, Terry Probin, and her stepfather clung to the belief that she was still alive, even as the likelihood of finding her seemed to diminish. The community's support was strong, but for JC's family, every day without news was a day filled with unbearable heartache. With no physical evidence, no sightings, and no ransom demands, the investigation began to stall. Each passing day added to the growing sense of hopelessness, as if JC had simply vanished off the face of the earth. Law enforcement remained vigilant, but as the summer of 1991 wore on, they were no closer to finding answers. What started as a massive search operation became a cold, painful waiting game for JC's loved ones. Philip Garrido's life was a descent into darkness long before Jaycee Dugard's abduction. His troubled past paints a chilling portrait of a man consumed by violent sexual fantasies, drug abuse, and a disturbing criminal record. Born in Pittsburgh, California, Garrido's life spiraled after a motorcycle accident in his teens. It was this event, coupled with a growing addiction to methamphetamine and LSD, that many believe contributed to his increasingly erratic behavior. Garrido's early offenses were already deeply disturbing. He was first arrested in the early 1970s for the sexual assault of a 14-year-old girl. Though the case never made it to trial, it was a foreshadowing of the violent tendencies that would later define his life. However, the crime that cemented his status as a sexual predator occurred in 1976 when he abducted 25-year-old Catherine Calloway. He took her to a storage unit in Reno, Nevada, where he raped and brutalized her for hours. Fortunately, a vigilant police officer noticed the suspicious scene and intervened, rescuing the victim and arresting Garrido. Despite the brutality of the crime, Garrido was sentenced to 50 years in federal prison, but shockingly only served 11. During his time in prison, he underwent multiple psychological evaluations, all of which pointed to the severity of his sexual deviance. He was diagnosed as a dangerous sexual predator with violent tendencies. Yet, despite these red flags, Garrido was released on parole in the late 1980s. His release marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would lead to the kidnapping of Jaycee Dugard. Upon leaving prison, Garrido was under parole supervision, but his behavior remained unchecked. He moved to Antioch, California, where he lived with his wife, Nancy, whom he had met while incarcerated. Nancy, already under his manipulative influence, became an accomplice to his crimes. Garrido's release, combined with a negligent parole system, allowed him to roam free, setting the stage for the horrific events that would soon unfold. It was in this environment that he would cross paths with JC, setting in motion 18 years of unimaginable torment. Jaycee Dugard's first days in captivity were a descent into terror. After being abducted and driven 120 miles away from her home in South Lake Tahoe, she found herself in an unfamiliar, nightmarish place. Philip and Nancy Garrido had taken her to their home in Antioch, California, a seemingly ordinary suburban residence. But behind their house lay a concealed backyard compound, hidden from view, where Jaycee's life as a captive began. It was a maze of makeshift sheds, tents, and tarps, pieced together to keep her imprisoned without anyone noticing. This secluded area would become her prison for the next 18 years. From the very beginning, Philip exerted complete control over Jaycee. He kept her handcuffed and isolated, leaving her naked and vulnerable in a tiny shed. Philip wasted no time in manipulating and brainwashing her, telling her that she had been taken to save others. He explained that by allowing him to act out his disturbing sexual fantasies on her, she was preventing him from hurting other people. This twisted justification became a core part of how he maintained psychological control over her throughout the years. Jaycee's captivity was brutal from the start. Philip repeatedly raped her and forced her to dress up and act out fantasies to satisfy his desires. Over time, he used both fear and manipulation to suppress her will to escape, isolating her from the outside world. Meanwhile, Nancy Garrido played a key role, not only aiding in the abduction but also helping to maintain Jaycee's imprisonment. Although her captors allowed her some interaction with the outside world, it was always closely monitored, and Jaycee remained trapped in the nightmare they had created. The years following Jaycee Dugard's abduction were defined by relentless abuse, both physical and psychological, at the hands of Philip Garrido. This torment culminated in a life-altering event when, after 3 years in captivity, Jaycee became pregnant. She was only 14 when she gave birth to her first daughter, an event that occurred in the same backyard where she had been imprisoned since the day she was kidnapped. Despite the horror of her situation, the birth of her child gave Jaycee something she had not experienced since her abduction: a reason to live. With the arrival of her first daughter, followed by a second when Jaycee was 17, her life took on a new dimension. Though still under Garrido's control, her daughters became her entire world. The children, unaware of the truth of their situation, believed that Philip was their father and that Nancy Garrido was their mother. In the bleakness of her captivity, Jaycee found some solace in raising them. She took it upon herself to teach them reading, writing, and other basic skills, doing her best to provide them with some semblance of a normal upbringing despite the horrifying conditions they were in. Jaycee's maternal instincts became her lifeline. Caring for her daughters gave her strength and a sense of purpose, allowing her to endure the continued abuse. Philip Garrido, who still controlled her life, saw the children as a means to keep Jaycee compliant, granting her limited freedoms within the confines of the compound. However, this small bit of autonomy allowed Jaycee to focus on her children's well-being, even if she could not escape her captors. Through the years, she poured all her energy into protecting them from the same darkness that had consumed her life, finding hope in their existence. Throughout Jaycee Dugard's 18 years of captivity, there were multiple missed opportunities where law enforcement and parole officers could have potentially saved her. Philip Garrido, a registered sex offender, was under the supervision of parole officers during much of Jaycee's captivity. Despite this, authorities regularly visited his home without ever discovering the truth behind the hidden compound in his backyard where Jaycee and her two daughters lived. One of the most egregious failures came from parole officers who visited Garrido's home several times but failed to conduct thorough searches. Garrido's history of sexual assault and kidnapping should have raised immediate red flags, especially given his erratic behavior and criminal past. Yet, during these visits, officers never looked beyond the surface of the house or questioned the large tarps and sheds in the backyard where Jaycee was being held. Another significant missed opportunity occurred when neighbors reported suspicious activity at the Garrido residence. Several people in the neighborhood had seen children in the backyard, a troubling sight considering Garrido's history and parole status. These reports, however, were either ignored or inadequately followed up by authorities. Despite these alarming signs, no substantial investigation was launched, allowing the years of abuse to continue unchecked. Frustration grew within the community and with Jaycee's family as these oversights became evident after her rescue. The failures of the parole system to adequately monitor someone as dangerous as Philip Garrido led to growing scrutiny of how sex offenders were being supervised. Had there been more diligence, more thorough investigations, or even a single moment of deeper inquiry, JC could have been rescued years earlier. The systemic failures became a painful reminder of how critical oversight and vigilance are in preventing such long-term tragedies. As the years wore on, Philip Garrido's mental state deteriorated further, causing his behavior to become increasingly erratic and unpredictable. While he had always exhibited disturbing tendencies, his delusions took on a new form as he began to believe he was chosen by God for a special mission. He developed grandiose religious fantasies and claimed to be receiving direct messages from higher powers. This delusion eventually led him to establish a makeshift church called God's Desire, where he claimed to have the ability to control sound with his mind. He even began distributing bizarre religious flyers around town, further illustrating his growing instability. Garrido's behavior didn't go unnoticed. People in the community began to view him as odd and unsettling, and his increasingly strange public appearances only fueled their suspicions. However, despite these warning signs, he continued to evade serious scrutiny from law enforcement. His religious delusions and erratic actions became a central part of his unraveling, making it clear that his mental state was rapidly declining. In August of 2009, this instability finally contributed to his downfall. Garrido brought Jaycee's two daughters to the University of California, Berkeley, where he sought to hold an event for his so-called religious movement. During the visit, his bizarre behavior caught the attention of campus security, who found his story unsettling and did a background check on him. Discovering his status as a registered sex offender, they requested he return for a follow-up meeting. This small moment of scrutiny ultimately led to the unraveling of his years-long charade and the discovery of Jaycee Dugard. In August of 2009, Philip Garrido, increasingly delusional and erratic, made a fateful visit to the University of California, Berkeley campus. Accompanied by Jaycee Dugard's two daughters, whom he had fathered during Jaycee's captivity, Garrido sought permission to host an event for his self-created religious movement. His bizarre claims and unsettling behavior immediately caught the attention of campus police officers Lisa Campbell and Ally Jacobs, who grew suspicious of the situation. As they engaged with Garrido, they noted inconsistencies in his story and were particularly concerned about the girls with him. Their quiet and odd demeanor, combined with Garrido's unsettling presence, led Officer Jacobs to run a routine background check. What she discovered was shocking. Garrido was a registered sex offender with a long history of violent sexual crimes, including kidnapping and assault. Alarmed by the findings, they contacted Garrido and requested he return to the campus the following day. When he complied, this simple background check would be the key that unraveled the 18-year mystery of Jaycee Dugard's disappearance. It set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to the rescue of Jaycee and her daughters, ending their years of captivity. The following day, Philip Garrido returned to the UC Berkeley campus as requested by campus officers Lisa Campbell and Ally Jacobs. He arrived with Jaycee Dugard's two daughters, and this time campus police were ready to dig deeper into his story. Their growing suspicions, fueled by his bizarre claims and the odd behavior of the girls, led to a more in-depth questioning. During this session, Garrido's convoluted explanations and evasive answers only heightened concerns. This prompted the officers to arrange a meeting between Garrido and his parole officer. When the parole officer arrived and confronted Garrido, the story began to fall apart. In a moment of increasing pressure, Philip Garrido reluctantly brought Jaycee and her daughters to the parole office. At first, Jaycee, under the immense psychological control of her captor, introduced herself as Alyssa, the name she had been forced to adopt during her captivity. However, after continued questioning and sensing the unraveling of Garrido's control, Jaycee finally had her moment of truth. 18 years after she had been abducted, Jaycee Dugard revealed her true identity. In that emotionally charged moment, she reclaimed her name and her life, bringing to an end nearly 2 decades of captivity and abuse. It was a breakthrough that not only stunned the officers in the room, but also shook the nation when the story became public. The moment law enforcement officers stormed Philip Garrido's home in Antioch, California, marked the end of an 18-year nightmare for Jaycee Dugard. After Jaycee revealed her true identity at the parole office, officers rushed to the Garrido residence. Their immediate goal was to secure evidence and rescue the daughters Jaycee had been forced to raise in the hidden backyard compound. What they found confirmed the horror of Jaycee's ordeal. The backyard, obscured by tarps and fences, was a makeshift prison of sheds and tents where Jaycee and her children had lived in isolation for years. As officers explored the property, they uncovered the grim reality of Jaycee's captivity, cramped living conditions, and the crude setup that Garrido had used to hide her from the world. The emotional weight of this discovery was palpable as Jaycee and her daughters were finally freed from the grip of Garrido's control. The aftermath of Jaycee's rescue was a moment of overwhelming emotion. After nearly 2 decades of separation, Jaycee was finally reunited with her mother, Terry Probin. The reunion was bittersweet, a mixture of relief, joy, and the heartache of lost years. For Terry, it was the miraculous moment she had never given up hope for, despite the years of uncertainty and pain. For Jaycee, it was the beginning of a long journey toward healing and reclaiming the life that had been stolen from her. Their reunion, while a profound moment of relief, was just the start of Jaycee's complex path to recovery as she began to navigate life beyond captivity with her daughters by her side. Following Jaycee Dugard's rescue, Philip and Nancy Garrido faced the full force of the law. The couple was charged with numerous crimes, including kidnapping, sexual assault, and false imprisonment. The case against them was overwhelming as the evidence of the horrific 18-year ordeal Jaycee had endured came to light. Philip Garrido, the primary perpetrator, faced charges of kidnapping, forcible rape, and sexual assault. His wife, Nancy Garrido, was also charged with kidnapping and aiding in Jaycee's prolonged captivity. Both of them initially pleaded not guilty to the charges, but as the investigation unfolded and the evidence mounted, including testimony from Jaycee herself, the Garridos changed their pleas. In 2011, Philip Garrido was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His crimes were so severe that the court ensured he would never be released. Nancy Garrido received a similarly harsh sentence, 36 years to life in prison for her role in Jaycee's abduction and captivity. These sentences brought a measure of justice to Jaycee and her family, though the emotional and psychological scars from nearly 2 decades of captivity would remain. The legal proceedings against the Garridos not only delivered justice, but also prompted a deeper examination of how such prolonged abuse could go unnoticed for so many years, leading to reforms in how parolees like Philip are monitored. After being freed from 18 years of captivity, Jaycee Dugard embarked on a long and difficult journey toward recovery. Reclaiming her life was not an easy process. She had spent nearly 2 decades isolated from the outside world, and the challenges of reintegration were immense. However, Jaycee's resilience and her love for her two daughters, whom she had raised while imprisoned, became the foundation for her strength. Jaycee took control of her narrative by publicly sharing her story in her memoir, A Stolen Life, published in 2011. In the book, she bravely detailed the horrors she endured during her years in captivity and the abuse she suffered at the hands of Philip Garrido. Through her writing, she offered an intimate and raw portrayal of her experience, helping others understand the psychological and emotional trauma of long term abduction. Despite the unimaginable ordeal, JC has shown remarkable resilience. Her recovery process involved reconnecting with her family, learning to navigate a world that had changed significantly since her abduction, and adjusting to her newfound freedom. She dedicated herself to raising her two daughters, who had grown up believing Philip and Nancy Garrido were their parents. JC worked tirelessly to build a stable and loving environment for them outside of the nightmare they had lived through. Her memoir, A Stolen Knife, became a powerful tool in advocating for other survivors of trauma and abuse. JC has since dedicated herself to helping others, founding the Jake Foundation, which provides support for families recovering from abduction and other traumatic experiences. Her courage and determination to not only survive but thrive have made her a symbol of hope for many who face unimaginable hardship. Jaycee Dugard's story is one of remarkable resilience and survival. After enduring nearly 2 decades of unimaginable abuse and captivity, her ability to reclaim her life is nothing short of extraordinary. JC didn't just survive, she chose to use her experience to advocate for others, becoming a symbol of hope for those who have faced similar trauma. Through her memoir, A Stolen Life, and the founding of the Jake Foundation, she has worked tirelessly to help other survivors of abduction and trauma find their way back to a life of freedom and healing. JC's legacy extends far beyond her personal story. Her case brought to light numerous systemic failures, particularly in the way parolees like Philip Garrido were monitored. It exposed glaring gaps in the oversight of sex offenders and raised awareness about how such individuals could operate under the radar, even with law enforcement periodically checking in on them. As a result, JC's abduction spurred changes to how parolees are supervised, with an increased emphasis on more thorough investigations and better use of resources to prevent such tragedies from occurring again. Beyond the legal and systemic reforms, JC's story has had a profound cultural impact, shining a spotlight on the long lasting effects of captivity and abuse. It has also given a voice to other survivors, empowering them to speak out and seek justice. JC's unwavering strength and determination to rebuild her life and advocate for others ensure that her legacy will continue to inspire and bring hope to those facing their own battles with trauma and survival. Before we wrap up, I just want to take a moment to thank you for sticking through this powerful and emotional story. Creating this kind of content takes a lot of research, dedication, and time, and I rely on your support to keep bringing these stories to life. If you found this video insightful or impactful, please hit that subscribe button, give the video a like, and share it with others. Your support helps me grow, improve, and continue to tell these important stories. Let's build this community together. Every bit of your support means the world.